Welcome to the Filibuster Podcast, Part 3 on the Iran and U.S. war. I'm Sean Evans. I am your host. I'm joined by Seth Brake, our international relations professor, and by Christopher Jones, our ancient history professor here. All right, so let's talk about the MOU, our deal to negotiate a deal. What's in the MOU? Memorandum of Understanding.
You know, it's been reported a lot as just a list of things the U.S. has given up. And I do think that is a correct read of the text of the document. But as you said at the beginning, some of the most important words in this are the final deal, a term that occurs many times throughout the document because it is a deal about a deal. So you can read too much into specific terms. But I think the whole MOU is DOA because of the item 1, where it says the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America, good start, and their allies. Now there's our problem. Yeah, right. Yeah, because Israel has not agreed to this document, and in that very first one it says they agree to the permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including in Lebanon, which means that for this to even lead to the final deal, Trump has to pressure Israel into stopping the war in Lebanon.
And so that kind of strikes me as one of the major understated things about this is that this deal basically gives Iran a veto over Israeli actions in Lebanon.
Or if you read it backwards, Israel a veto over U.S. negotiations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Other parts.
There is a mutual agreement to respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, which is only Iran's is in question there. So that's a concession. It is an agreement to make a deal. Also, the United States is going to remove its naval blockade, and Iran is going to let stuff through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran agrees to not collect tolls for 60 days.
Which kind of implies they can after 60 days.
That's right. And this is probably the biggest blow to U.S. foreign policy in the document, even though it's one of the less discussed ones. We can talk about that in the implication section if we want to. Also, Iran is going to get $300 billion for reconstruction. It's not clear who that's coming from, but the deal is that they would get it. The U.S. is going to lift all sanctions.
Which is kind of a form of reparations then.
Maybe. I don't know. To be completely honest with you, I don't know what that could lead to.
Okay.
That's the number that Iran is expecting to get from this deal. Then Iran promises not to get nuclear weapons, but that has to be negotiated in the final deal. Of course, it's just a directional thing.
Well, and they've promised not to get a nuclear weapon for decades. The question is, we don't really trust them, right?
Also, I mean, there's another big question about whether the people who negotiated this even have any control over that now. But again, we'll discuss that when we talk about Iran. Let's see, the U.S. is going to release all the frozen funds, Iranian frozen funds, and then lots more discussion about the final deal, which would then take a UN Security Council resolution to enforce. But again, all of this depends on the final deal actually taking place, which depends on Israel no longer attacking Lebanon.
Which has already been violated. So let's kind of talk about it. It's a deal to make a deal, but yet we're basically shooting at each other every other day, right?
Yes. I mean, the conflict has thawed a lot. I mean, there is a lot less bombing going on in Iran. And I don't know. I don't think the fact that people are still shooting and dying means that that's not why this isn't working. Right. Like that's true, but that's not the problem.
Okay, so then one thing that critics are saying a lot is that this MOU is similar to or worse than Obama's JPAC, or Joint Plan of Action deal with Iran in 2013. Is that a legitimate critique?
The JCPOA was not. First of all, there wasn't an ongoing war, right? It was reached after probably the most successful sanctions program in history. It was approached. It had a lot of international support. It was negotiated amongst allies globally, right?
Russia, Europe, the U.S., and Iran.
It was just a very different type of thing. So I don't even know if the comparison makes sense. Obviously, the things about the JCPOA that made a lot of people angry, like the unfreezing Iranian funds and things like that, those are in this too. So there's that nice ironic echo if you're looking for that historically, but I just don't think they're comparable things.
One thing I noticed from what you read is there's no time limit on the statement that Iran won't pursue a nuclear weapon.
Let me make sure that's true. Yeah.
While everything in JCPOA expired in 2030, right?
Yeah. So I mean, and I understand the point you're making that it's different context, apples and oranges, but yeah, they get money released. That it looks like now that Iran has every intention of controlling the Strait of Hormuz, the veto on Israel, and potentially vice versa. Doesn't that make it seem worse, though?
Yeah, I mean, Obama was negotiating from a position of strength. He had successfully coerced the Iranian government into that position,
and so Trump's
you can quibble with the terms, whatever.
Is negotiating from weakness then,
or a parity? It's not a situation where he has forced Iran to the table. It's a situation where we thought we could get one thing, and now we're trying to get the best we can.
Okay, so we're talking about, to a large extent, there's a lot of criticism of Trump in this war and the MOU and the deal to make a deal. There's some people who are saying he's actually doing a good job of this.
Yeah.
What's that argument?
Well, it is true that a lot of Iranian military capability has been degraded. I mean, the command structure has been killed. A lot of the missile launchers have been destroyed. They if they wanted to do a big missile salvo now, it would be smaller than it was at the beginning of the war. Also, in terms of casualties, I think we've lost 13 Americans in this conflict, which is a tragedy, and it's something that we need to take very seriously. And and that's something that Trump should have been considering when he's thinking about the war. But in terms of the scale of the operation, this is still something where we have pulled this off with a lot of concern for American lives. And also, and I know that there have been some really terrible incidents, but in terms of the civilian casualties are really low for the amount of bombing we've been doing. So the proportionality and the precision of it, the way it was pulled off, some of the demonstration of American care and precision is still I think a really meaningful demonstration.
Yeah. So I understand all those points, but yeah. The argument kind of reminds me of the military's argument in Vietnam. Look at all the victories we have, the bombings we've done, the number of Viet Cong we've killed, but that didn't work out well. So what would be your response to that?
If you're thinking about it from the Israeli perspective, it could just be that we have set Iran back enough to buy some time. It's the old mow the grass story, right? Maybe Israel just provoked us into hitting Iran hard enough that it would be a while until they initiate another conflict through their proxies with Israel, which buys them time to do whatever they want in Lebanon. If you think about the Middle East as a long-term project of the United States to help Israel, then maybe we've bought them time and some political flexibility, maybe.
Okay, but even with that,
Christopher's been squirming.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'll let you.
Yeah. I want to throw an idea out there with JCPOA that maybe another way of reading it is that Obama was making a bet that the Iranian Islamic Republic regime wouldn't last until the end of the agreement, and that it would be overthrown internally by the time that
maybe
the provisions expired. But I think that the strongest criticism of JCPOA is that it gave the Iranians a sense of invulnerability to start wars with their proxies all over the Middle East, especially in Yemen, in Gaza, Lebanon as well, though they were already deeply entrenched in Lebanon, in Syria, because they felt like they had foreclosed the possibility of conflict with the United States, and they were going to have a free hand to act in the Middle East without the homeland being targeted directly. In fact, I was at an event when I was at Columbia. This was during Trump's first term, where Jake Sullivan, who was played a big role in negotiating JCPOA.
Right, and was Biden's national security advisor.
Yes. He was talking about his experiences negotiating the agreement, and he was surprisingly candid for somebody, at that high of a level, talking to college students on a college campus. He said that, he said, I think that criticism of JCPOA, that it enabled Iran to funnel more funds and a greater sense of invulnerability into their proxy forces, is valid, and that this was a major downside to the agreement. So in some ways the road to the October 7th massacre in Israel began with Obama's JCPOA agreement.
Well, this is a really good example of something that actually comes up a lot in my classes when we talk about sanctions, because it's really easy to look at a sanctions program and try and decide if it worked or not. It brought Iran to the table and we got this nuclear agreement out of it, right? But that assumes that the purpose of the sanction was actually the nuclear agreement, when Iran's work with proxies was just as much of a concern to the U.S. and its allies as the nuclear program. So can the U.S. even credibly commit to not put the sanctions back on Iran if they're complying with one part but not another part of a core foreign policy interest? And I think that's part of the problem with the thinking like that, because it was an extremely effective program if all you care about is this one issue. But there's a lot of stuff going on there, and I think that's why it's so hard to say in this conflict, what does the U.S. want? Just like it was back then, a little bit dishonest to say the U.S. only cares about nuclear issues.
Yeah. Okay. Go.
Proxies are ideologically vital to the Islamic Republic, right? They can't abandon them without abandoning core ideological commitments that
which is
render
what
the
has made
regime
Lebanon such a problem
impossible,
here in these negotiations. Right? Yeah.
And you see also who's policing the streets in Iran. It's not just the Basij; it's Iraqi paramilitaries that the Iranians have been arming and funding all these years.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's
that's also coup proofing and building the infrastructure of repression as well.
Okay, well, let me ask this. I think one of the best arguments that people can make about Trump doing the job well is he recognized it was a mistake and he's trying to get out now, and better now than waiting too long. What's your response to that? Better now than later.
This is the information problem, right? He didn't know who to trust, what information was good, whatever. Now he does know, and maybe he is willing to cut his losses and leave. That is very hard for leaders in democracies to do traditionally, to leave conflicts. There's that thing where the democratic peace shows that democracies are less likely to start wars, but also less likely to end them, right? You get stuck in the conflict. And so in some ways, maybe Trump is better than the average democratic leader in that he recognizes his mistake, and he's kind of acting like an autocrat in that he can just walk away from his mistake, and maybe there will be no repercussions at the ballot box for that. So maybe the polarization of American politics insulates him in some ways from the normal reasons that people have a hard time ending a war.
Yeah, well, and in terms of insulating himself from the ballot box, there's other reasons people are voting against him.
Sure.
Beyond this. All right. So we've got a negotiation that's going on. So what's going to be necessary for this to be successful from the United States perspective?
That's that. I don't know.
So how do we apply leverage to move what a memo of understanding looks like is favorable for Iran into a final deal that is more favorable for the U.S.?
The real answer is that Trump needs to get Israel in line if he actually wants to be able to negotiate something like this.
I would actually argue the opposite. We need to separate the Lebanon issue from everything else.
I think Trump was trying to do that and failed.
There's been more movement on that in recent days. The Lebanese and Israeli governments have just signed an agreement that is entirely the work of Marco Rubio behind the scenes.
Well, then that might be that process continuing. Then, maybe that is the U.S. trying to get that under control.
And I mean, you say bring Israel under control, but no U.S. ally is going to let themselves become South Vietnam. That's never going to happen again. They will, fair. And Israel views Hezbollah as probably the leading core security threat that they face, and they will break the U.S.-Israel relationship over this if it comes down to it. Yeah,
and I'll even throw this: Netanyahu is getting attacked by the opposition and even members of his own coalition for not going as far as they think he needs to.
Yeah. Yep. But it's those parallel sets of actors that make it so difficult for Trump to negotiate this. Okay. So I guess it's kind of what I'm trying to get at.
So you can tell the Iranians, if you want to negotiate with Israel, you can open negotiations with Israel. You talk to America, they're a sovereign state. We don't control them. You can fly. You can fly to Jerusalem like Sadat if you want to. If you want to talk to them, but we don't control them, and so we will only talk about stuff that we control.
All right. So what are the next steps here? What are the next steps in the negotiation, resolution, or whatever else?
There is a ticking clock for the economic effects of the strait closure that Trump is dealing with. We talk a lot about the effects on the oil industry, and which affects all logistics around the world, right? But also the fertilizer industry is being hit by this, and that's going to affect food prices in a lot of countries.
Well, it affects transportation, and all this is increasing inflation. Yeah.
Part of the problem for this is that a lot of those food prices effects are not things that Americans are going to directly feel, which means that some of the more dangerous consequences of this dragging on will not directly affect the American election. But regardless, the whole global economy is, suffering from this in some ways. Now, I think just this last week, oil prices came back down to where they were pre-war levels. So maybe there's some ability to maybe Trump has some time for figuring this out. But still, the closure of the strait is affecting things that are connected to the oil market and things that are connected to the food markets, which means that Iran probably thinks that time is on its side in these negotiations.
There's a very big loophole in the Hormuz discussion, and that's Oman. And because the agreement says, the Iran and Oman each through their own territorial waters. Well, here's the playbook how it happens. The other Gulf states lean on Oman to not charge anything through their half of the strait. Then all the ships go through the Oman half because it's free. And then Iran has a choice. You can either wave at them as they go by and collect zero money in tolls, or you can shoot at them. And that's what they've been doing in the last couple of days, has been shooting at them. But the U.S. has responded with airstrikes on Iranian targets. And then they just agreed to a ceasefire yesterday. So you can either do this over and over again. You can go all in and try to shut down the strait completely and shoot at every ship that goes through. Or you can back down, and I don't know which the Iranians are going to do, but that's...
So do they have to shoot at every boat that goes through? Do they just have to shoot at one, and the insurance prices go up to where that prevents the tankers from going through, while at the same time, isn't this encouraging everyone to build a pipeline to the Red Sea or the Mediterranean to undermine?
It's never going to match
Iran
the volume,
power,
though, right? But yeah, if this goes on for long enough, life finds a way, right?
And there's also a kind of just an elastic effect, right? The higher oil goes, the more it's worth it to try to take the risk of trying to run through the strait, and then more people will try to do it, right? So. It's, closing Hormuz isn't a long-term leverage necessarily. Either people will bypass it or they will have to use increasing military force to try and keep it closed, which has other risks, right, of renewed large-scale conflict, which carries significant risk for Iran as well.
They might just think they have to outlast Trump, though.
How far?
Well, till the next election, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are the global political consequences of these actions?
When we were talking about the memorandum of understanding, I said that the concession of Iranian authority over the strait was a big problem. But this goes back to the fact that ever since the end of World War II, the mission of the U.S. as a superpower has been ensuring free navigation of these global maritime checkpoints. And the fact that it looks like we can't actually insure one of them, and we're signing agreements with other countries as if they control them, I think is a fundamental change in the way the U.S. talks about itself as a global superpower. I think this is now, a lot of people would say it is a recognition of the reality that has existed for a while, right? But it's still, I mean, it's stark, and it's a big moment because, we talked about the closure of the strait as a hypothetical thing for a long time, and it's something we always knew that could happen, and they could try and do it, right? But the fact that not only has Iran demonstrated that it's possible, but also that we are now negotiating as if we recognize that they have that right, which again, Again, the MOU is worth about the paper it's printed on, and whatever. But still, I do think that represents a shift in the U.S. status in the world. And this is where the discussion about China becomes more important, too, because China has not been harmed by this. A lot of people at the beginning of this conflict said, this is going to damage the Chinese energy markets, it's going to hurt their economy, but they're doing fine. And they are looking like the responsible power in the world right now, when the U.S. is looking irresponsible. And I just think that we are seeing something that we might one day look back on as one of those first signs that U.S. power really was in decline, even if the direct consequences aren't something like that.
Right. Though I think to a certain extent, Trump's pullback from the world has it's just part and parcel of that. So it's kind of which one is the impact.
A lot of Trump's pullback from the world was symbolic, though, and I think here we see something that's tangible, and I think it's significant.
All right. Okay, so let's just, what's some of the global economic consequences then? You talked about higher prices for things because of the importance of oil. Are there other big challenges?
Does the petrodollar system survive this?
Okay. Talk about that.
Well, what do you think?
It's a good question, and I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. It's the Gulf states are not happy with the way this conflict has been managed.
Well, they got bombed.
Well, yes, but more recently, during the post-ceasefire period, the Iranians were bombing Kuwait and the UAE, and Trump was asked if he was going to retaliate, and he said, well, it's not that bad, basically. It's no big deal,
right?
Because he didn't want to upset the negotiations. But it also sent a signal that the United States isn't going to defend the Gulf states. So, the UAE took matters into their own hands. They bombed some of the Iranian refineries with their own jets. But yeah, there's countries are also hedging because they're worried the United States is going to completely pull out of the Gulf region, and then they're going to have to make a deal. The Gulf states don't act like normal countries in international relations.
Yeah.
They, ever since 3000 BC, they've been dependent on trade because they don't have arable land, or at least not very much of it. And so they have to have good relations with whoever the local superpower is in order to maintain their prosperity. So they kind of twist in the wind with, and are very good at sensing which way the wind is blowing. Now, the question is, what sort of deals are they going to cut with Iran, and how would that affect the global economy? I don't know. There's what does Iran want from these states, aside from not hosting American military bases? Do they want money? Do they want them to start pricing oil in yuan or euros or some other currency in addition to dollars? It's hard to say, but the problem is Iran now has leverage there that they didn't have before. So these things are at least on the table.
Right. I mean, and that's kind of significant because one of the things I'd say over the past 10 years is the rise of the Gulf state powers. I mean, Qatar's involved in just about every deal that's going on these days. And so you have seen that they have been exercising influence beyond their power and size.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of the petrodollar system kind of coming to an end, it's old. It's, it's lasted longer than the previous economic orientation of the post-war order, right? These are these international economic orders don't last that long. I don't know. This might be time for the recalibration anyway.
Yeah, but what does that do to our national debt, for example?
Oh, I mean, horrible things. But
which Trump himself is also largely, and not solely, but in a significant portion responsible for between his two terms.
But I don't think the future of U.S. power is going to be determined by the survival of the petrodollar as much as whatever happens with the rise of China and Russia's new foreign policy program in Europe.
So I mean, from what I've seen, this also affects the SWIFT system in terms of financial transactions and things, because since we have used that against Russia after the Ukrainian things, there are other nations saying, hey, here's the way that the U.S. can weaponize that kind of thing to where we're looking for alternatives. So it just seems like, as you said, are we looking at the slow unraveling of U.S. hegemony, which I guess hegemony is over and has been over, but now the idea is, what kind of power will we be?
Well, and I guess that's why I talk about Russia and China here, because we don't really know what the sources of international order are going to be in the next decade. It's not going to be the post-war order. It's not going to be the post-Cold War system. Something is dramatically changing right now. And I think the unraveling of the petrodollar system is just a consequence of the fact that the U.S. is facing real competition right now. And that is a unipolar institution, and we don't have a unipolar world.
Okay, so we're approaching the end here. So what lessons should we learn from this?
Well, I do think, there's been a lot of discussion about just war theory around this conflict. I know the Pope came out and said that this is not a just war, which is, the fact that it feels ramshackle in terms of the way our war aims were constructed on this, I do think is it's a violation of the historical Christian approach to conflict. Now, I don't join some people in saying that the war was unjust because the U.S. was an aggressor in it. I do think the things that Iran has been doing in the Middle East have been destabilizing. I think that it is a legitimate rival to U.S. interests and threat to U.S. allies. However, going into the war with fragments of a plan or no plan, I do think was irresponsible to the point of being unjust.
Yeah. So one of the big things I would say from this is the importance of a well-functioning advisory system for president. And I think what we have seen is in Trump's second term is there's no one willing to tell the president no. If we go back to the New York Times article that Christopher mentioned in the first episode of this series, there were people, Vice President Vance, General Kane, Secretary Rubio's had concerns. They expressed them, but then followed it with but. And when you follow it with that magic word but, it's the idea, okay, we're going to say, here's what we're going to do because they figured Trump had already made up his mind. There need to be people who are willing to tell the president, no, this is a bad idea. And I think that's part of one of the lessons. And this isn't just a Trump thing. One of the things that we've seen over about the past 20 years is that presidents hire ideologues across the board, and there's too much groupthink going on in decision making in every presidential administration.
I do wonder, though, if part of Trump's problem is he's hired incompatible ideologies across his cabinet. So if you look at J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio's approach to not just this conflict, but American foreign policy in general, they're diametrically opposed. And yet they're both giving Trump advice and trying to shape the outcome of U.S. foreign policy, and it's leading to something incoherent. The recent agreement between Israel and Lebanon versus the MOU, for example, negotiated by Rubio was deeply involved in the Lebanon negotiation, Vance in the MOU, and you end up with contradictory things. Is interesting. It's come out through a couple channels who's been advising Vance about Iran. Two names have repeatedly come up. One is Sohrab Ahmari, and the other is Trita Parsi, who's founder of National Iranian American Committee, which is a lobbying group that's other members of the Iranian diaspora have often accused of being a unofficial lobbying group for the Islamic Republic government. NIAC, as it's called. Now, Parsi's not affiliated with NIAC anymore. He's a vice president of the Quincy Institute, which is a sort of neo-isolationist think tank. Andrew Bacevich at Boston University is also involved in founding that. There was a report in FP the other week that State Department...
FP
Free Press.
Free Press. Okay,
yeah.
I thought you meant foreign.
Yeah, that
see there.
State Department was trying to deport Parsi as an unregistered foreign agent, which was quickly denied at State. But, if it's true and, Rubio's trying to deport one of J.D. Vance's advisors on Iran, that shows some serious lack of coherence and unity in the Trump cabinet on this.
Well, I mean, and it's not just that. I mean, I think part of the problem is he's also giving Witkoff a lot of power to negotiate deals, and he thinks everything's a real estate deal, and he's kind of shown that he's been in over his head, whether it's with Iran, Russia, and everyone else. So I think that goes to the importance of expertise. Other thing I'd say is air power doesn't win things. And I thought that we had learned that lesson years and decades ago, but that's kind of something that I see going on there. And I think also the idea of having an overall strategy is important. Trump, I don't think, thinks long-term. And if he was, I think he would realize you can't alienate allies all the time because you're going to need them at some point, and you have to prioritize. And I think he's just very reactive.
Yeah. I think it also really highlights the difference between regimes that are built on cohesive movements and stable institutions and those that aren't. You have to approach them differently, and that's one of the big lessons here as well. I mean, Iran is a real player in the region, and it's a country that has institutions that have legitimacy of their own, and I think that's something that we're noticing through this process.
Okay, so you mentioned a little bit about just war theory here. Are there other ways that we should view this entire interaction, intervention, whatever you want to call it, from a Christian perspective?
I don't know if I can beat just war theory in terms of ways of thinking about it. Although that was the other thing the Pope said in his comments, is that it no longer applies to modern conflict. So I don't know. Maybe somebody's working on that. But I do think that the way in which we have conducted ourselves in the conflict has actually been fairly in line with just war principles.
In terms of proportionality and discrimination, yes.
Well, proportionality is hard to know because it's hard to define our goals, right? But in terms of discrimination, I actually do think now, that one airstrike that destroyed the school was really bad, right? Yeah. It was also clearly an error probably made by an AI agent, right? So, that doesn't justify it, right? But the fact that was the bad one, in a bombing campaign as extensive as that, I do think that it shows that we're showing quite a bit of discrimination there. The ones that you just have to have a plan. And it is your duty as a leader to have a plan in these conflicts, because people are going to die and your country's going to lose security and influence. Maybe we're just revealing the influence we've already lost, but the situation that we're in now is worse than it was when the war started on almost every one of our war goals, with the exception of, if you believe that one of our goals was sinking the Iranian Navy. If that was that, we've really aced that one. But
mostly in port, because they weren't using their Navy.
There was that one that was in Sri Lanka, right?
Yeah.
But it just hasn't gone well. And Iran is going to come out of this in a better position in the world. Now, very seriously harmed militarily. And, a lot of people have talked in the past about how Iran was kind of governed by the elderly. Like, it was one of those countries that has a very old... Well, that's not true anymore. Their new leadership class is younger and more and, open to new ideas, things like that. We have kind of changed the game on that a little bit, but not in the direction we wanted to.
Right.
And another question, we haven't really gotten to this. I'd love to hear your take on it, though. But Christopher... is we didn't conduct the regime change we wanted to in Iran, but have we kind of transitioned them into being a military dictatorship?
That's entirely possible, or more specifically in Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps dictatorship.
Right. IRGC,
going back to your Iran as a gerontocracy, it's sort of like the Soviet Union in the sense that World War II kind of created this leadership class that then never made way for younger generations. And, the guys, who were running Iran in 2026 were guys who were fighting in the Iran-Iraq War, 46 years ago. It was the revolutionary generation.
And they're dead. I mean, the leadership has been killed.
It's an interesting dynamic because the supreme leader is supposed to be elected by a group of
the Guardian Council or something, or
this is the bigger group, right?
The Assembly of Experts, right, who are all appointed by the previous supreme leader, and they were meeting, as the Iranian constitution says, to pick the next supreme leader, and the Israelis bombed the meeting,
right?
Because they know everything that's going on in Tehran, apparently. And then they announced after the bombing raid that the Mojtaba Khamenei, the previous leader's son, had been selected. Ironically, on the day that happened, my modern Middle East class, we were reading Ayatollah Khomeini's denunciation of hereditary monarchy as un-Islamic. But nobody's seen or heard from Mojtaba Khamenei.
Right.
He hasn't made any public appearances.
That might just be careful.
Yeah, he's probably... But the point is, if you're hiding in a hole in the ground in the middle of nowhere because you're afraid you're going to die if you show your face in public, it's hard to control a country.
Decisions.
You're right. You're not making decisions.
And, I mean, it was like the second week of the war when the local IRGC groups were operating independently with missile targeting, right? So, I mean, they already weren't being controlled.
Yes, but the question is who controls access to the supreme leader? And because traditionally in Iran's system, especially under Khamenei, the IRGC has been growing in power for decades. It's a state within a state. It controls significant amounts of the economy, especially the illegal economy, covert action overseas, got its own military forces. Khamenei was kind of a manager who had to like decide between different factions within the government. Like he was the one who kind of listened to everybody and then ruled in somebody's favor. And there's no indication that I've seen that Mojtaba has the ability to do that. He's rather much more dependent on the IRGC. There's even a question, as I was going through that airstrike history, right? Because there's a question whether he was even regularly and legitimately elected at all, according to their procedures. And so he's not the player, the main player now, right? It's Vahedi, who's the IRGC head, and then there's, Mohammad Ghalibaf, the Speaker of Parliament, is another, and Mahmoud Pezeshkian, and they're struggling for power a bit. You can see it. And there are other hardliners trying to influence things in a more belligerent direction. And that provides an opening, right, that for the United States, if we play it right, to really put an anaconda squeeze on the system that could cause it to crack or provide an opening for some other actor to assert power within Iran.
So what you're kind of saying is that we shouldn't treat this as finished in terms of the U.S. perspective, that there's still options open to the administration?
Yes, there's still very much, the outcome's not decided yet. There's still things that can be done if it's a narrow and difficult diplomatic path, but the possibility is there.
So letting the MOU fail might be the best case scenario then, if you are the U.S. and you want better terms.
Yes, but you got to make sure it fails because of the other side.
Right.
And there are ways to do that, like with Oman and the Oman route through the Strait of Hormuz. Right. Iran, the MOU says Iran and Oman will jointly manage it. Well, if Oman says everyone can come through our side for free, which will take some diplomacy to accomplish, and they may want stuff in some other manner that we may need to give them, they may want something else in return for that, but it can be done, in which case, that puts the Iranians in a difficult position, and the coils get a little bit tighter. Separating the Lebanon and MOU files, as Marco Rubio has been doing, also creates another space, right? If you can take Hezbollah off the board, it gives one fewer piece of fewer lever for Iran to use.
Well, I guess we might have to record another podcast in a few months on this then. See what happened.
To see how everything goes, because right now it sounds like we need some patient diplomacy on the part of U.S. and it could be one of those.
It could be one of those situations where the situation improves when Trump is focused on something else, and his diplomatic officials can then be working still on the issue.
Yeah,
like the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah,
which actually was a foreign policy win for the for the first Trump administration,
and it was basically letting Mike Pompeo do whatever, and Trump shows up to take credit for it.
That's right.
At the end,
and maybe that's the ideal situation there. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. I think we covered a lot here. I think this is our longest series of podcasts, so I'm sure that we have given people a lot of good things to think about and chew on. So, Seth, thank you. Christopher, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I will yield back the balance of my time.